it might be a stretch, but like also like I can't speak to you. I know you got a couple. How old are you?
I'm 36.
Yeah, so I know you got a couple years on me, but like, so I'm 29, and it's like the activation from probably like 17 through now is like I think most people once you get to around voting age, you're like politics is cool, and you gotta kind of figure out like where you lead politically and kind of grow from there. So like I'm sure I'm more politically active and engaged now than I was even 6 years ago. But 6 years ago I was also like 23 and just like drinking like Red Bull vodkas at 1 a.m. and like finding girls do cocaine with. Like, like I wasn't like a respectable adult.
Okay, cool. I'm good.
You're good. Okay, I'm good too.
Okay.
That part wasn't recorded.
So 2020, Trump gets reelected. Knowing his track record from just this term, what does he need to do to objectively make America better in his last term? What can he do realistically in terms of his temperament and his personality and his politics? What would you hope? What would that look like legislatively, policy-wise?
If I'm being something of a nihilist here, but also somewhat realistic, I think the best thing we could hope for in like a Trump re-election is that like his ego is sated in such a way that like he feels like he won fair and square for a second time. He no longer feels the need to go on these like incredibly like selfish crusades to make everything about himself, and he is able to actually like center the country's needs for a change. I think if he could do that, not that I necessarily agree on a lot of the things that he wants to do, like there are some like if he can do that long enough to get an infrastructure deal done, awesome. I think that would be great for America. I think America needs a gross overhaul to its infrastructure on both like traditional infrastructure like roads and bridges and new infrastructure like nationwide broadband and Wi-Fi, rural broadband and 5G, and like all these investments we need to make in the country. Like I think that's very achievable for Trump. I think there is weirdly some hope that maybe like post a 2020 election he might be able to change course and like repair some relationships with foreign leaders. I don't know which ones those will be and where that will take us. But again, like if he's able to kind of like put aside his ego and his need to center himself and like him personally winning everything, and kind of like work for what's best for America, I think his tactics could be useful in some certain relationships.
Do you think anyone can take the belt away from him, from Trump?
What do you mean?
Like kind of like he's there right now.
Oh
right?
yeah. Well, I think that like that's the issue with Trump. Is like that's his view of the world. It's like I need to have the belt at all times. So like if he wins in 2020 and it's like a landslide uncontested victory and not like it was last time around, like he wins the popular vote too and everything, I could see him like being like, okay, I really have the belt now. Like let me put this on the shelf and like most other presidents, here are my last 4 years, and like let me try and get something done. And
do you think what are his chances of winning? What are your thoughts? What's your prediction?
Right now, I think it's a landslide. I don't think it's even close. I think Trump's going to get reelected. I can't imagine how you look at the current state of affairs and think anything else. It's really depressing. It must be elating for you, but it's very depressing to me. But yeah, I think that is the most likely outcome right now.
What in terms of, and we'll switch over. What do you mean state of affairs that indicate that it would be a landslide?
I think the Democratic primary took the worst parts of 2016's Democratic primary and partnered it with the worst parts of 2016's Republican primary. So now you have all the hyperbole and like sensationalism that was the media coverage of 2016's election, except being applied to 20 different Democrats, which is only going to make whoever the eventual Democratic nominee is weaker in the long term. And in the court of public opinion, like the best worst choice. And so it's like, okay, like we narrowed it down from this field of people who were just like slinging mud at each other. You found out all the worst parts of all of you. I guess you're okay. Let's go send you off to face Trump, which is essentially where we landed with Hillary, which was like nobody voted for Hillary Clinton. There was 63 million people who voted against Donald Trump. Not a single person voted for Hillary Clinton. Maybe some middle ground here. I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton either, just so we're clear. Like, fuck her. I'm good. But that being said, like I think a big reason that so many people had an issue with Hillary Clinton was like she didn't have much of a message, and a lot of the time she spent in the public eye was just fighting criticisms from other people. And I think when you have 20 people in a primary, eventually they've done a pretty okay job up to date. But I think eventually what it's going to come down to is Biden clinging on for dear hope, slinging all the Oppo research he can at everybody in the field. And we're eventually going to get either Biden Sanders, either way, that's going to like alienate half the party. A bunch of people aren't going to turn out like Trump's going to win the election, or you're going to get some middle ground like milk toast s candidate like a Pete Buttigieg, who I might support, and like he might be able to like unify enough people to like pull some people over. Like I personally, I think he'd be a big Pete Buttigieg guy if you like got to know his policies, but he's very much about unifying. Kind of wants everybody to have opportunity, national service, a lot of those things.
I like Mayor Pete, and I like he's cool and stuff. Everything I met him, he spoke here at the Back Bay Center and stuff. Everything he's cool. Like and stuff. Everything like a veteran.
That's what I mean. Like, put it this way, I think he has some crossover appeal for a lot of people. So, like, maybe a candidate like him could appeal, but like the likely outcomes are going to be Sanders, and half the Democrats are going to stay home, and nobody on the other side is going to vote for him. You're going to have Biden, who like fuck that. Like, I have the same position on Biden I had on Hillary Clinton. Like, he's equally racist. He's like a sign of old times, and I want generational change. And I don't know who else is really formidable against Trump, except with the outside chance I will say, if Beto becomes the nominee and is able to win Texas. That's the one outcome I can see essentially American going Democrat.
Yeah, man. I don't think there's a candidate that could beat Trump, really. I think there's
Joe Walsh guy?
there's there's in the Democratic Party, I think like you and me and stuff, everything like the one candidate I think that like has the best chance, in my opinion, would be Bernie Sanders and stuff. Everything I think like you and me and stuff. Everything like
heartwarming to hear is a Bernie bro.
I think like you and me and stuff. Everything like that's probably like you and me and stuff. Everything if I was that's who I would like you and me and stuff. Everything because I feel like his message and stuff. Everything like and the things that he's speaking about, I think resonates, even though his appeal is socialism, but like I think like he's really like addressing and he really understands the issues that are going on in America. I just don't agree with like like maybe some of his policies, but like I think like as far as like his message of like and stuff and everything, like I think he really understands it. He's not like somebody who's like pandering to African Americans like Hillary Clinton with her bag of hot sauce, and I think he's very genuine. And but like I don't think like these other candidates necessarily like Joe Biden it doesn't really have like any appeal like and stuff and everything to me as a voter. But like I don't think like a lot of people and stuff and everything I've talked to in the Democratic Party like going to like these events in New Hampshire, I've had heard like a lot of people and stuff and everything who are like like they really like who are Democrat that like Pete Buttigieg and Tulsi Gabbard. She has a lot of support in New Hampshire, even though she didn't make the last debate and stuff and everything. And I just think that Donald Trump will definitely win in 2020. I think like one of the things and stuff I would like him like to continue like and stuff like what he's been doing. I think like and stuff everything that the country is gonna continue getting better. And,
getting better. Where do you think the trajectory of America is going? Where do you foresee us in the next 10, 15, 20 years?
Oh man, and 10, 15 years. I think like obviously that the country will have changed a lot, like and stuff and everything. I think like with like and stuff and everything, like the diversity. I think like and stuff by that point, you'll see like as far as like white people are being the minority and stuff and everything. And I think by then and stuff and everything, if you follow like and stuff and everything, like the censuses and stuff and everything, I think they like projected that like so like and what's interesting too about this election and stuff, this is the first election and stuff and everything where African Americans aren't the the largest minority and stuff and everything. So I think like that's why you see like the Democratic Party and stuff and everything making like efforts and stuff and everything to reach out like specifically to Hispanic voters. But like one of the things and stuff and everything I'm really interested in is that like how much like support that like Trump has like amongst Hispanic voters and stuff and everything. People who came to this country and did it the right way, and like and stuff, and were able to like establish like and stuff and everything like a legitimate way in this country. And like I think like and stuff and everything, like other countries I don't really hear it may be the case, but like the case of like upward mobility and stuff where you can start like literally come to this country with nothing. And like and stuff and everything, like Andrew Yang, for instance, and stuff and everything. I heard the story of he put on Twitter and he was talking about how his father was like a peanut farmer. And like and stuff, he grew up like saying on they didn't even have floors, like used to sleep in the dirt. And like and stuff, he came like his son's running for president. I think like that's one of the beautiful things about like America. And I think that will continue. I think like this will continue to remain like the land of opportunity. And we can't let socialist values like and stuff impede on like the capitalism that has allowed this to be the greatest nation in the world. So
trajectory for you too? 8, 10, 15 years, yeah.
So a few things to clarify. White people won't be the minority; they just won't be the majority. Those are different things. They'll still be the largest class of people in the country. They just won't be over 50% of them. They'll still be the majority of the population. Secondly, the support Hispanics, the support Trump has with Hispanics is at 15% with women and 22% with men. So I wouldn't say that's like glaringly reflective of him doing a great job. As far as like the trajectory for our country, like I think we're gonna, frankly, at the end of these next 4 years, probably see whether or not Trump feels like he can push himself into a third term and like rewrite the Constitution. And if not, then he'll most likely run one of his children. Do you think there's not a real possibility Trump runs one of his kids?
No, I don't think that's a possibility at all. Like I think
Don Jr.'s already floated that several times.
I don't think that's gonna happen. Like I think like to be honest, like I don't have a crystal ball, but I don't see that happening.
Whatever direction it goes, I assume we will continue to see the rise of ethnic nationalism and the continued rise of white supremacy, hate groups, and terrorism within our domestic borders. I don't think we're going to see anything happen on gun control other than perhaps red flag laws that we both disagree with, that Trump's already advocated for passing. I think we're going to see those laws get used against minority and oppressed groups already, and we're going to see a lot of people on red flag lists who are black and queer and poor and all of the other categories of people that Trump continuously works against. And we're going to see the disarmament of the American public by the government, just specifically of certain classes and certain types of people. I don't know how much worse it's going to get from there, but I don't think it's going to get better. I think we're going to continue to not do anything about climate and deny that climate's real. Watch as the entire planet we're on over the next 15 years heats up to an uninhabitable distance. I mentioned earlier that America is one of the few places that I believe certain parts of it will be able to sustain that. We're going to see a mass migration of millions and millions of people, much more than 40,000 a day coming over our borders. We're going to need some way to sustain that. I think instead of trying to sustain that, we're going to fight them all, and we're going to be in a pretty rough place.
Kind of went through a whole day of talks. How was that for you guys?
Oh, it was good, man. I think it's fun, like it's just like to be able to talk in a respectful environment and hear somebody else's like opinions, even if they differ from like your own. Like I think like I was surprised by like how much common ground we were able to find, and like things and stuff that we agreed on, like some things and stuff, everything that I wouldn't even like we found like that we thought pretty much the same about, like as far as like Hillary Clinton and her being a horrible choice for president, and like just like other things. So
I mean, par for the course, man. Like this is what I do for a living, is like have conversations with people who are not like me and try and figure out like I joke all the time with people. It's like I care about the who and the why and the how, but not necessarily like the what. Like whatever you believe is cool with me, man. Like I'm not gonna change your mind. Like I don't pretend to. I spent 29 years trying to change people's minds. I went 0 for 29. So like I'm trying to do things a little differently now. I guess my view is like, yeah, man, like it's good to have like respectful conversation with the other side, like learn where other people are coming from. Like we disagree with a lot of things, we agree on a lot of things. Like for instance, like I think we're a lot closer on universal healthcare than I thought. I think the big barrier for you seems to be like the implied cost of those things. I think if people can find a better way to articulate that, like the cost will be relatively nominal and the care will improve, a lot of people would be on board with universal healthcare. I think a good chunk of the electorate is around where you are, at least like the 30% or so we need to convert. So like that's encouraging for me to hear. I think other things like truly blew me away, like your denial of the existence of systemic racism while like telling anecdotal stories of having systemic racism like force applied against you is like still blowing my fucking mind. Like you can identify like all the reasons and all the ways that like the history of racism has played into that moment, but then like the idea of acknowledging that to you is like a victim's mentality.
I
like,
feel like,
that was always difficult.
Yeah, like I think like you and me and stuff, everything you're misinterpreting me. I'm not saying like you and me and this systemic racism doesn't exist, but like I feel like you and me it doesn't exist enough like you and me and stuff where I feel like it's affecting you and me from succeeding in the world. Like you and me and stuff, everything. I feel like you know me, it's not stopping me from like like achieving my destiny, and like that's like you and me and stuff, everything. Like where I feel like you have to be mindful of the things that you pay and put your attention to. I hear that a lot of times and stuff, everything like specifically in the African American community where it's like it's like yeah, like you and me and stuff, we're protesting and stuff, everything. We're against this police violence and like me and stuff. Like how much does it change? How much has it gotten better, or is it still the same? And you just have to pick like you and me and stuff your battles, and this is where I'm at with it. And I feel like you and me and stuff, everything. Like I think like you and me is the better thing to make choices and solutions and stuff, everything to like kind of like not have to deal with those issues. Like you and me and stuff. If you don't like a job, you don't have to work there. Like you and me and stuff, everything, you can find another job and stuff, everything where you're happy. Like you and me and stuff, it's a way to like you and me get around like the obstacles and stuff, everything in life.
That's fair, and I hear you on that. I guess just like to me, like the obstacle shouldn't be there in the first place. So coming up with solutions to avoid the obstacle doesn't change the obstacle.
I mean, like in a perfect world, but I feel like you and me and stuff, everything in any world, there's always going to be obstacles, like you and me and stuff, regardless. Like
right, and I'm okay with there being obstacles, but obstacles based on my identity and how I was born, those shouldn't be obstacles. That's like telling women, like they, I get rape happens, and that's kind of like a bad look, but like, listen, like sexual violence isn't that big of a deal, right? Like we've mostly moved on from that. Like guys don't like grab their secretaries by the asses anymore everywhere you go, so it's fine. And it's like you just learn how to dress the right way and like quit the jobs that it affects you at, and like just stay away from your rapist. And it's just like that's such an insane line of thinking to me as like a feminist.
I don't know, like you and me and stuff, everything. Like like I have daughters and stuff, everything. And if they were like getting harassed and stuff, everything, like instead of like trying to reinvent the wheel, like you and me and stuff, if you're like you and me and stuff, everything, I like my mindset is like you and me and stuff, like what can you do to solve this problem? Like like I watch like you and me and stuff, everything, like the TV show about Roger Ailes and stuff, everything with Russell Crowe, and like these women that were being like sexually harassed and stuff, everything by like Roger Ailes, and like you and me and stuff, everything, and like you see like you and me and stuff, everything, them like staying like staying on this job, and like they're knowing like you and me and stuff, they're gonna be subjected to this. It's like why like wouldn't you just like like leave if like and continue to be subjected to like you and me and stuff, everything in particular.
All of your opportunities outside of this one, and you're under contract. And if you try to meet this contract, you won't be able to work in the industry that you trained your entire life to be a part of.
I mean, I think like
you shouldn't be subjected to sexual harassment as your only choice to have that.
I mean, I think like obviously like you and me and stuff, everything, like yeah, like it's unfair, but like sometimes it's everything like you have to make like you and me and stuff like difficult decisions. I know how I am as a person and stuff, everything. Like if you're like if somebody was like like yes. I've never like you and me and stuff, everything like received like like racism on a job, like I'm saying, where it was just so blatant obvious, but like if I were things and stuff, everything I suspected were racism and stuff, everything, and if I can't address it and it's not going to change, if I like know like the person in power is racist and there's nothing I can do to change it, or there's no one I can speak to like you and me and stuff, everything, like I really don't see like a reason and stuff, everything, like why like I feel like I have to like saying like forge and like create. Why don't I go create my own opportunity, or like find like I'm saying an opportunity?
Nobody's preventing you from going to those opportunities. I'm just saying you should report those people to make sure that other people aren't in that same situation after, and that we as a government should do something.
On that note, and segueing from the I think that show's called The Loudest Voice in the Room or something.
Yeah,
right?
Loudest Voice.
The Loudest Voice is
it's a good show. It
is. I'm going to give you, what is one perspective or one thought that you want to instill into, for you, Ryan, into Mitch, as if he can't say anything, no rebuttals, and then one thought and opinion that you want to instill into Ryan as well, too. So we'll start.
One of the things is everything that I think that, like, I think being a police officer is like a difficult job, and like, just because like you and me and stuff, like a police officer may have drawn their weapon on you, it didn't necessarily have anything to do with your race. Like that would be it.
Okay, that's one. And then your one perspective or opinion that you'd like to instill into.
Like a united future for our country cannot come from a fringe candidate. And I don't care if that's Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or anywhere else outside of that spectrum. Like the unity that we're both searching for and the ability for everybody to participate in the opportunities that we both like value about this country are going to come from somebody a little closer to like the in between, and that's going to involve compromise from people like me and you, and agreeing on some in between that's beneficial for our future for everybody. So I hope you come around on that.
All righty.
Good.
Well, okay. On
Thank
that
you,
note,
guys.
on that note.